I'm Barbara, 32F, and I've been married to Jimmy, 35M, for 4 years. We met in college when I was a sophomore and he was a senior. I was immediately drawn to his kindness and protective nature. We dated for 5 years before getting married in a small ceremony surrounded by close friends and family. Jimmy and I have always had a good relationship, but lately we've been having some serious issues because of Jimmy's younger brother, Brent, 29M. To understand the situation better, I need to give you some background on their family dynamics. Jimmy and Brent lost their parents in a car accident when Jimmy was 18 and Brent was 12. It was a devastating blow to both of them, but especially to Brent, who was still so young. Jimmy, being the older brother, took on the responsibility of raising Brent. He put his own dreams on hold, working multiple jobs to support them both while also trying to finish college. This experience created an incredibly strong bond between the brothers, but it also established an unhealthy dynamic where Jimmy feels overly responsible for Brent's well-being, often at the expense of his own needs. And now, our marriage. Brent has always struggled with independence and responsibility. Throughout his 20s, he bounced from job to job, never really settling into a career. Jimmy was always there to bail him out financially or use his connections to find Brent new opportunities. I've lost count of how many times Jimmy has lent Brent money that was never repaid. Despite my concerns about this pattern, I tried to be supportive. I knew how important Brent was to Jimmy, and I wanted to be a good sister-in-law. But over the years, I've watched Brent take advantage of Jimmy's generosity time and time again. The current situation started about 6 months ago when Brent's wife, Lisa, left him for another man. They had been married for just 2 years, and the split was messy and painful. Brent fell into a deep depression, started drinking heavily, and eventually lost his job as an accountant due to frequent absences and mistakes. At first, I was sympathetic. Divorce is hard, and I understood that Brent was struggling. Jimmy and I invited him over for dinner regularly, listened to him vent about Lisa, and tried to encourage him to seek therapy or join a support group. But as weeks turned into months, it became clear that Brent wasn't making any effort to improve his situation. Last month, Brent showed up at our doorstep late one night, clearly drunk and emotional. He told us that he couldn't afford his rent anymore and begged us to let him stay with us, just for a little while, until he got back on his feet. Jimmy immediately said yes without even glancing in my direction. I was blindsided and upset that Jimmy made this decision unilaterally, but I bit my tongue in the moment. Later that night, when Brent was asleep on our couch, I tried to talk to Jimmy about setting some ground rules and a timeline for Brent's stay. Jimmy brushed off my concerns, saying we needed to be there for Brent in his time of need. Reluctantly, I agreed to let Brent stay with us, thinking it would only be for a few weeks. But it's been over a month now, and Brent shows no signs of leaving or even trying to find a job. He sleeps until noon every day, leaves messes all over the house, eats our food without contributing anything, and spends most of his time playing video games or watching TV. I work from home as a graphic designer, and having Brent around all day is incredibly disruptive. He's loud, he interrupts me constantly, and he's even started using my office when I'm not in there, claiming he needs the space to job hunt, though I've never actually seen him apply for anything. I've tried talking to Brent about cleaning up after himself and looking for jobs, but he just makes excuses or empty promises. When I bring it up with Jimmy, he defends his brother and says we need to be patient because Brent is going through a hard time. But I feel like we're enabling Brent's laziness and irresponsibility at this point. The final straw came last week. I had an important client meeting via video call, so I asked Brent to please be quiet and stay out of the office for a couple of hours. He agreed, but halfway through my call, he barged into the office, clearly drunk, and started rummaging through my desk drawers, muttering about needing a pen. I was mortified and had to abruptly end my call. When I confronted Brent about his behavior, he got defensive and accused me of being uptight and unsympathetic to his situation. I lost my temper and told him that his behavior was unacceptable and that he needed to start looking for his own place. Brent stormed out of the house and, of course, called Jimmy to complain about how mean I was being. When Jimmy got home that evening, instead of backing me up, he accused me of being heartless and abandoning family in their time of need. He said I don't understand because I'm an only child and don't know what it's like to have siblings. We got into a huge fight about it. I pointed out all the ways Brent has been taking advantage of us and disrupting our lives. Jimmy countered by bringing up all the times his family welcomed me for holidays when my own parents were being difficult. My relationship with them has always been strained. He said he never complained when my college friend stayed with us for a week last year, when she was visiting town. I felt like Jimmy was completely missing the point. Hosting someone for a week is very different from letting them move in indefinitely with no end in sight. I told Jimmy that I love him, but I can't continue living like this. Our home doesn't feel like our own anymore with Brent here all the time. I said that Brent needs to move out by the end of the month. Jimmy got even angrier at this ultimatum. He accused me of trying to come between him and his brother and said that if I force Brent out, I'll be damaging their relationship irreparably. He stormed out of the house and didn't come back until late that night. He's barely spoken to me since then, except to reiterate that he won't kick Brent out. I'm at my wit's end here. I feel torn because I know Brent is struggling, but I also feel like we've done enough to help him already, and he's taking advantage of our kindness. I don't want to come between brothers, but I also don't want to be a doormat in my own home. Am I the asshole for wanting to kick my brother-in-law out? What should I do in this situation? Update 1. Thank you all for your responses and advice. I really appreciate the support and different perspectives you've offered. It's given me a lot to think about. After reading your comments, I decided to try one more time to have a calm, rational discussion with Jimmy about the situation. I waited until we both had a day off work and Brent was out of the house. I made Jimmy's favorite breakfast and suggested we have a picnic in the park where we had our first date, hoping the nostalgic location might help him remember our relationship's importance. At the park, I calmly explained how disruptive and stressful it's been having Brent living with us. I shared specific examples of how his behavior has affected my work and our home life. I emphasized that while I sympathize with Brent's struggles, I don't think we're actually helping him by letting him freeload indefinitely. I also opened up about how hurt I've been feeling by Jimmy's dismissal of my concerns and his accusation that I don't understand sibling relationships. I reminded him of how supportive I've been of his relationship with Brent over the years, despite my own complicated family history. To my surprise, Jimmy actually listened this time. As we talked, he began to open up about his own conflicted feelings. He admitted that he knows Brent has been taking advantage of the situation, but he feels trapped by guilt and obligation. He confessed that every time he tries to talk to Brent about finding a job or moving out, Brent brings up their parents' death and how Jimmy promised to always take care of him. Jimmy broke down, crying as he shared how scared he is of losing Brent, the only blood family he has left. He's terrified that if he pushes Brent too hard, Brent might start drinking even more heavily or do something drastic. Jimmy revealed that Brent has made vague comments about not wanting to go on that have really worried him. I was shocked by this information. I had no idea Brent had been emotionally manipulating Jimmy to this extent. It made me see the situation in a new light, and I felt a renewed sense of compassion for both brothers. After a long, emotional conversation, Jimmy and I agreed that we need to find a way to help Brent that doesn't involve him living with us indefinitely. We decided to give Brent 2 more months to get a job and find his own place. In the meantime, we're going to set some firm house rules. Brent must contribute to groceries and household expenses. He needs to do his share of chores around the house. He must actively apply to jobs every day and show us proof of his applications. No more drinking in the house. He needs to respect my work hours and stay out of my office. Jimmy agreed to have a serious talk with Brent about these expectations and the 2-month timeline. He also promised to look into resources for addiction counseling and therapy for Brent, recognizing that his brother needs professional help that we can't provide. I felt cautiously optimistic after our conversation. Jimmy and I seemed to be on the same page for the first time in weeks, and I was hopeful that we could work together to improve the situation. However, things took an unexpected turn the very next day. I was working in my office when I overheard Brent on the phone in the living room. He was talking to someone, I think a friend, and complaining loudly about how unreasonable Jimmy and I were being, and how we were kicking him out on the street. He called me several nasty names and said I had turned Jimmy against him. The worst part was when I heard him say, "I know how to handle Jimmy. I'll just remind him of Mom and Dad, maybe threaten to do something stupid and he'll back down. He always does." I was furious. All the compassion I had felt the day before evaporated in an instant. I stormed out of my office and confronted Brent about what I'd heard. He was shocked to realize I'd overheard him and quickly tried to backpedal, claiming I had misunderstood. We got into a heated argument. Brent accused me of eavesdropping and said I was trying to come between him and his brother. I lost my temper and called him an entitled, manipulative mooch who needed to grow up and take responsibility for his own life. I told him I knew about his emotional blackmail of Jimmy and that it needed to stop immediately. Brent's face turned red with anger. He started yelling about how I could never understand what he and Jimmy had been through, how I was trying to steal his brother away, and how he'd make sure Jimmy knew what a cold-hearted bitch I really was. Then he stormed out of the house, slamming the door behind him. I was shaking with anger and adrenaline. I tried to call Jimmy at work, but he didn't answer. I sent him a text asking him to come home as soon as possible because we needed to talk. A few hours later, Jimmy came home to find me still upset and Brent nowhere to be seen. When I explained what had happened, I expected Jimmy to be as angry as I was at Brent's manipulation. Instead, to my shock and dismay, Jimmy defended Brent. He said I shouldn't have confronted Brent like that I must have misunderstood what I heard, and that even if Brent did say those things, he probably didn't mean them. He accused me of provoking Brent and making the situation worse. We got into another big fight. I couldn't believe Jimmy was taking Brent's side after everything we had talked about the day before. Jimmy ended up leaving to go find Brent, saying he was worried about his brother's state of mind. That was yesterday, and Jimmy still hasn't come home. He's not answering my calls or texts. I have no idea where he and Brent are or what's going to happen next. I'm at my wit's end here. I feel like I'm the bad guy no matter what I do. Part of me just wants to pack up and leave for a while to get away from this whole toxic situation. But I also don't want to abandon my home, or let Brent drive a wedge between me and Jimmy. I don't know where to go from here. Any advice on how to handle this mess would be greatly appreciated. Update 2. It's been a week since my last update, and things have only gotten more complicated and stressful. After Jimmy left to find Brent, they both stayed at a hotel for a couple of nights. Jimmy finally called me on the third day, saying they were coming home and we all needed to talk. I braced myself for what I expected to be a difficult conversation. When they arrived, I was shocked to see how haggard and emotional both brothers looked. It turns out they'd spent those days having intense discussions about their relationship, their parents' death, and Brent's struggles. Jimmy had finally confronted Brent about his manipulative behavior, and ultimatums were made. The three of us sat down in our living room, the tension palpable. Jimmy started by apologizing to me for dismissing my concerns and leaving like he did. He admitted that he'd been in denial about the extent of Brent's issues and the strain it was putting on our marriage. Brent then spoke up, his voice shaky. He apologized for his behavior and acknowledged that he'd been taking advantage of our kindness. He revealed that he's been struggling with depression and alcohol addiction since his divorce, using emotional manipulation to avoid facing his problems. The conversation that followed was long, emotional, and at times heated. We discussed boundaries, expectations, and the need for real change. By the end, we had come to an agreement. Brent would move out within 2 weeks to a small apartment Jimmy would help him find. He would enter an outpatient rehab program for his alcohol addiction. He would start seeing a therapist to work on his depression and codependency issues. Jimmy and I would attend couples counseling to work on our communication and rebuild trust. Family dinners would be limited to once a week, and Brent would need to respect our boundaries. I felt cautiously optimistic about this plan, but also exhausted and wary. The past few months had taken a significant toll on my relationship with Jimmy, and I knew we had a long road ahead to repair the damage. The next 2 weeks were a flurry of activity as we helped Brent find an apartment and pack his things. There were moments of tension, particularly when Brent made comments about feeling kicked out, but Jimmy was firm in reinforcing the plan we'd all agreed to. Now, Brent has been in his new apartment for about a week. He's started his rehab program and seems to be taking it seriously so far. Jimmy and I had our first couples counseling session, which was difficult but productive. We're learning to communicate better and address the underlying issues that led to this situation. However, I'm still struggling with lingering resentment and trust issues. I find myself questioning Jimmy's commitment to our relationship and worrying that he'll backslide into prioritizing Brent over our marriage. I'm trying to be patient and give him a chance to prove himself, but it's hard. There have been a few concerning incidents. Twice now, Brent has called Jimmy late at night, claiming to be in crisis. Both times, Jimmy rushed over to Brent's apartment, leaving me feeling abandoned and worried. When I expressed my concerns, Jimmy got defensive, saying he can't just ignore his brother when he's in need. I understand the desire to help family, but I also feel like clear boundaries need to be established. I'm worried that Brent is already falling back into old patterns of manipulation and that Jimmy isn't strong enough to resist. On a positive note, I've been focusing on rebuilding my own sense of self and independence. I've started taking an online course to expand my graphic design skills, and I've been reconnecting with friends I'd neglected during the chaos of the past few months. It feels good to reclaim some control over my life and remember who I am outside of this family drama. Jimmy and I are trying to plan a weekend getaway to reconnect and focus on our relationship without distractions. I'm hopeful that it will be a positive step, but I'm also anxious about leaving Brent unsupervised for an entire weekend. I'm taking things one day at a time, trying to balance being supportive of Jimmy's relationship with his brother while also advocating for my own needs and the health of our marriage. It's a difficult tightrope to walk, and I'm not always sure if I'm handling things the right way. Any advice on how to navigate this complex family dynamic while protecting my marriage would be greatly appreciated. I'm committed to making this work, but I'm also scared of being hurt again if things don't improve. Update 3. It's been about a month since my last update, and I wanted to share the latest developments in our ongoing family saga. Brent has now been living in his own apartment for 5 weeks. The transition hasn't been smooth, but there have been some positive changes. He's been attending his rehab program regularly and, according to Jimmy, hasn't had a drink in 3 weeks. He's also started seeing a therapist twice a week to work on his depression and codependency issues. Jimmy and I have been continuing with our couples counseling. It's been challenging but illuminating. We've uncovered some deep-seated issues in our relationship that go beyond the situation with Brent. Jimmy's need to be the protector and fixer, stemming from his experience of losing his parents and raising Brent, has led him to sometimes dismiss my feelings and opinions. On my part, my difficulty in expressing vulnerability due to my strained relationship with my own family has made it hard for me to communicate my needs effectively. We're slowly learning to communicate better and understand each other's perspectives. It's a work in progress, but I feel like we're moving in the right direction. The weekend getaway we planned was both wonderful and stressful. We had some great moments of reconnection, enjoying each other's company without the constant tension of the past few months. However, Brent called Jimmy multiple times during our trip, each time with some minor crisis that he insisted only Jimmy could help with. Jimmy tried to set boundaries, but I could see how torn he felt each time his phone rang. On the positive side, I've thrown myself into my work and personal development. The online course I'm taking has led to some exciting new project opportunities. I've also started volunteering at a local animal shelter, which has been a great source of joy and stress relief. As for our family dinners, we've managed to stick to the once-a-week schedule. They're still somewhat tense affairs, but they're improving. Brent seems to be making an effort to engage in more positive conversations and has even started asking me about my work, which is a big step for him. However, there have been some setbacks. Last week, Brent lost his job at the local supermarket where he'd been working part-time. He claimed it was because his boss was unsympathetic to his recovery process, but Jimmy later found out that Brent had been consistently late to shifts. This led to another argument between Jimmy and me about how much support we should be providing Brent. I'm trying to be patient and understanding, but I still find myself feeling resentful at times. There are moments when I wonder if this is what the rest of our lives will look like, constantly walking on eggshells, waiting for the next crisis with Brent. Jimmy and I had a long talk last night about our future. We both agreed that we want to make our marriage work, but we also acknowledge that Brent's issues will likely be a part of our lives for the foreseeable future. We're trying to find a balance between being supportive family members and maintaining healthy boundaries. We've decided to set some new ground rules. Jimmy will not rush over to Brent's apartment for every crisis. Instead, he'll encourage Brent to use the coping strategies he's learning in therapy. We'll have a no Brent talk rule for date nights, allowing us to focus on our relationship. I'll be more involved in discussions about how we support Brent rather than Jimmy making one-sided decisions. I'm cautiously optimistic about these changes, but I know we have a long road ahead of us. I love Jimmy, and I want to support him, but I also need to make sure I'm taking care of myself and my own needs. As we move forward, I'm trying to take things one day at a time. Some days are better than others. I'm learning to celebrate the small victories, like Brent making it through a family dinner without any drama, or Jimmy and I having a disagreement without it turning into a big fight about his brother. I'm not sure what the future holds for us, but I'm committed to doing the work to make our marriage stronger. At the same time, I'm also trying to build a life for myself outside of this family drama, focusing on my career and personal interests. Thank you all for your support throughout this journey. Your advice and perspectives have been invaluable. I'll update again if there are any significant changes in our situation.